Hey, Davis, it is great to see you. Really excited to talk to you. A lot of big news in your world, specifically related to Carta, where you're leading M&A and a number of other things, I think, as I understand it. So, really great to have you. Wanted to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Reed McBride, who originally introduced us. He gave me some questions. I won't ask all of them to you, but there are a couple that I thought were really interesting, and so I'm looking forward to channeling Reed here in the
Uh,
discussion. I
that's
wanted to
that
start.
that's great. Well, thanks for having me today. And yeah, I mean, if Reed was giving you questions, I'm wondering should I leave now or should how hard are these going to be? You're scaring me a little bit if Reed's going to be the one asking me questions. Reed was actually the first person who interviewed me at Carta, or one of the people who interviewed me at Carta. So I owe a lot to him, and I know he can be a stickler sometimes. So you officially have me on watch.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I promise it'll be all good. And Reed, is working on his own fund right now, and actually did a virtual event with us last year, which was great. Just kind of talking about his journey. So it's
That's
cool to have you
awesome.
here as well.
Well,
So
thanks for
speaking of
having me.
journeys, I would love to just have you. You have this really kind of cool background where you started as an institutional investor, and then you sort of move to the operating side. So yeah, maybe just tell me a little bit about that, or tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's very different than what you typically see uh, out in the startup world.
Well, no, I mean that's good to hear because sometimes I think it's almost like too typical. I mean, I guess the beginning is a little typical, right? It's I started my career in investment banking. I did that for a couple of years. I started on the software team there, which I think was a good decision back in kind of like the mid 2010s or so. And worked on a couple of IPOs, worked on a couple of transactions for kind of like mid market software companies, which just kind of got me like exposed to the space, which was great. One of the deals that I worked on was for a portfolio company of Adam Street, and so then when I was looking to leave banking, one of the firms that I interviewed with was Adam Street, and I kind of had a connection there, working with one of their portfolio companies, which I think is always helpful when you're doing an interview there. And then I did 2 years at Adam Street, which is an unbelievable experience. I worked on the growth equity team there. Most people know Adam Street as a big institutional LP, but I worked on the directs team there. So I was doing kind of like Series B to D software investing, and but also had a lot of exposure to kind of the funds business as well. So just like a great platform to start your career in when you're working in private markets or venture in general. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then another connection point. Carta was one of the was one of the companies that I diligenced at Adam Street. Unfortunately, we didn't end up investing, but I always remember the pitch that Henry gave when he kind of came into the office. It was funny. I actually didn't really cover fintech at Adam Street. I covered cybersecurity and infrastructure. But the person who did cover fintech was sick on the day that Henry came in and presented at our office, and so I pitched in for her basically. And so Carta was like basically the only fintech company that I looked at when I was at Adam Street. And then, funny enough, when I was looking to leave Adam Street and go to the operating side, Carta was, one of the companies that I remember really liking. And then they had a wonderfully ambiguous job title open called strategy manager. And coming out of venture, you're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. And I said, hey, this seems perfect for my ambiguous skill set. And so then, got the job at Carta, and I've been here for almost 7 years ever since, wearing kind of like a number of hats across like strategy, biz ops, corp dev, partnerships, and now chief of staff as well. So it's been a really fun ride, but it is funny just to see how those kind of like connection points in your career work like that.
Yeah, it's funny, as you probably know from friends, there are certainly folks who are looking to maybe exit the venture industry and go do something else. So the point you made about sort of a jack of all trades, I think, is a very appropriate one, and something I felt myself when I was leaving venture
Yeah.
and went over to the operating side. So yeah, anyway, really resonated with me. But so let's kind of talk about the latest news at Carta, and specifically out of your 7 or 8 or 9 roles, M&A is obviously a big piece. You've been very busy over the
Yeah.
last really over the last year, and the latest pickup was a CRM company, which I found really interesting because I've spent a lot of time sort of in and around that space. I spent a lot of time with investors who are using a variety of CRM tools. Other fund administrators have launched CRMs as well on top of what they're doing. So,
Yep.
what was the strategic, sort of impetus for that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of like what we're doing today, right? So, I'd say there are kind of like, the way to look at Carta's business today is, what we're calling kind of like an ERP for private capital, right? Which is basically a way for the three constituents in private capital, underlying assets, GPs, and LPs to kind of all live on the same platform for data, for transactions, all to be flowing kind of like on one platform. And really, one of the core pieces of that is kind of the fund admin or the fund accounting platform that we give to GPs. And when you look at that, we do really great job for all the kind of like CFO tools. I'm almost use the term back office there, but Henry has forbade me for using the term back office because I don't think CFOs like that very much. But we do obviously all the kind of like accounting, taxes, things like that. We do a really good job in the middle office in terms of kind of like portfolio company data collection, especially given our connection with underlying portfolio companies. We bought a company called Tactic last year that allows you to kind of like take that underlying data and then basically run your fund model off of that. But one of the key pieces that we were kind of always missing was kind of that more GP or kind of like front office facing tool, right? And that's where obviously a CRM comes into play. So we've been looking at the CRM market, probably for the past like 4 or 5 years, honestly. And it just now kind of felt like the right time to kind of pull the trigger on it. Part of that was we think we found a really good product and a really good team in the List Alpha team. But it just felt like, hey, this was the right time to kind of like round out the suite a little bit more with a CRM or more of a front office facing tool.
And there's so many options out there for CRMs, and some, especially newer ones, right, are more, I would say, friendlier in terms of integrations and
Yeah,
APIs and things like that. So, how did you think about the build versus buy versus
totally.
partner there, or was it just a build buy? Like, how did you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we knew we wanted to bring it in house in some capacity, right? Just because we sit on such interesting data that we thought, hey, we could provide a pretty unique CRM experience, particularly on the fundraising or the LP CRM as we're calling it, kind of side of the house. Just given that we have so much information on your existing LPs, like it makes sense for us to basically extrapolate a lot of that kind of like economic data and marry it with the relationship data that you would typically see in a traditional CRM. That was one of the main things that we looked at in the market was, hey, like who's building a CRM on more like modern infrastructure? And, there are lots of CRMs out there that were kind of like, built in the mid 2000s or so that a lot of VCs are unfortunately, and private equity firms are still using today. And we just thought, hey, I think there's going to be a replacement cycle that happens here. A lot of firms have just even skipped that and are going straight to some of the newer tools that you see, like just building it directly into Claude or ChatGPT or things like that. But one of the things that we looked at was like, hey, who's building on modern infrastructure? Who is, really tight with in terms of kind of like API integrations, getting good data into the CRM, making it kind of frictionless. And then, who's, kind of playing in the open. Like List Alpha was one of the first kind of CRMs that we looked at that launched an MCP server, right? So like that was one of the things that said, hey, we know that this company and this team is kind of like living in the present and not living in the past in terms of kind of like what customers are asking for and needing. And so that was definitely one of the things that we look for.
And when, if you can share this, when was sort of the directive given to like, yes, we need to go like find a CRM company? And
Um,
the
uh,
reason I'm asking the question is because there's been a huge step change in the last few months in the
yeah,
models, right? And so, like, deciding before that, seeing that, right, and deciding after, I think are two different things. So I'm curious
totally.
when y'all decided.
No, I mean, this was probably like a early last year, maybe late 2024. kind of like directive from Henry and the team of like, hey, we need to round out our GP experience. And we're seeing that across the spectrum in corp dev, right? Like these acquisitions take at least like a couple of months to kind of like marinate, execute, and integrate. And the pace that the models are kind of developing at, it definitely makes corp dev a little bit challenging from that perspective. I think one of the things that we're seeing with CRM is like, and where I kind of view it right now is, I think it's going to be tough as a kind of like standalone category in private markets. I think it does need to be integrated as a part of a larger suite, and I think that there's opportunities to do that too. And whether people want to build their kind of like CRM adjacent workflows kind of like on top of that, or on top of like a Claude or a ChatGPT, like absolutely they should go do that. But we still think that there's kind of like core underlying like relationship intelligence and economic intelligence that you can marry together in a product like Carta. But I think the era of maybe like a standalone kind of like private capital CRM, I don't know what that's going to look like in the next couple of months. But we were always confident that if it's integrated with your fund admin data, that there's still a lot of value there.
And Carta's done 4 or 5 acquisitions.
In the past year, we've done, or maybe past like 15 months or so, if you roll back to late 2024, we've done 4 acquisitions in total. I think we've done around 13 now. So yeah, we've been, I guess we've been in operations for, call it 14 years or so. And so we've done about, call it 13 acquisitions during that time. And the majority of it has come in the past couple of years.
And as that pace has changed, how do you have to approach it differently? There's like now there's more velocity in terms of those M&As. So how do you have to, on the team side, on how you engage with companies, how does that all change?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely kind of like you need to build up more of like an institutional kind of like integration capacity internally. Like, we built out our own integration team, but then it's also just like, the functional teams inside of Carta going through those integrations a couple of times. Like that's as important as building a specific integration team specifically inside the company. Is just like all those teams knowing kind of like what to look for when you're thinking about integrating an acquisition. And then I think you just need to be thoughtful about the strategy too, right? Like we're lucky in the sense that we cover such a broad swath of kind of like product areas that we can do kind of like smaller company tuck-ins, and it touches different parts of the business. And so you're not putting kind of like over-capacity on one part of the business, right? So, hey, we're doing a CRM acquisition, which is more, front office tools, GP focused. We did, Axelex, which is more of an LP facing tool. We did Servatus, which is more of a private credit facing tool. There are teams where all 3 of those acquisitions are affecting their teams, but the teams that are doing the majority of the work on like product engineering, sales, for example, are relatively siloed. So they can really focus in on those particular acquisitions. And they're teams that, definitely have to do work across all 3, but we've tried to be thoughtful in terms of like, hey, which teams are we kind of like overloading with acquisition capacity versus like, what teams are we kind of like spreading the burden between, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And did you work on all of them, or like when did you sort of come into the picture timeline wise?
No, I think I've personally led or helped lead I think 11 acquisitions at Carta now. So I've been here for the I've been here for the past 7 years. So I've seen all the different deals that we've done during that time, which has been super interesting, especially across like a very changing kind of like macro and even just like technology environment too.
And I know they probably all have their own unique nuances and then a lot of similarities too. What, if there's one that sort of sticks out as like kind of the most intellectually interesting one to you, which one would it be and why?
Oh man, I mean, I don't have kids, but I imagine that's like picking between your children.
Your 11 kids,
yeah. So yeah, it's tough for me to say what's like been the most intellectually interesting one. I mean, God, I can't really give you an honest answer to be honest there. I mean, I've really enjoyed all the deals that we've done over the past couple of years. I mean, I think one of the things that's been really crystallizing for us, I think in a post Carta X world, we really refocused the company on like, hey, this private capital ERP is really the kind of like is really the strategy that we want to go after. And I think that really kind of just like helped crystallize our mission, and it helped crystallize kind of like our M&A focus as well. So I'd say the deals that we've done over the past kind of like 15 months, 18 months or so have been super targeted with like a very clear, like, yes, this is the exact problem that we are solving for customers, for like where it exists in the roadmap and things like that. And I think that's been really helpful. And, in talking to kind of like other corp dev teams at similar companies, or similar companies at similar sizes to us, like I think, in a post ZIRP world, and I think a lot of companies have really had to kind of like focus on where they want to spend their time and where they want to spend their efforts, and I think that's been the same case for us in a corp dev capacity.
Okay, interesting. One area, and this is one from Reed.
Yeah,
Reed was talking about the trend around AI native law firms and
yeah.
law firms, right? Big constituents for Carta. So, what do you think about that trend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting. I mean, obviously, there is a lot happening in the in the legal AI space right now, and I think what you're seeing is you have a handful of companies that are selling directly to law firms, and are trying to make law firms more efficient, which I think is great. And then you're also seeing the other side of the coin, which is like, hey, how do we develop kind of like more AI native law firms? It's super interesting, and it'll be interesting to see where that kind of like plays out over time. We work really closely with law firms, and we've always had an interesting kind of like relationship with law firms, right? Like I wasn't here during that time, but we actually used to have a more contentious relationship with law firms because they used to basically own they basically, or previous cap
Yeah,
table
the
companies.
spreadsheet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they used to sell directly to the law firms themselves, and then we came in and we said, hey, law firms, your money is no good here. We're going to sell directly to the companies. And law firms thought that was a threat. But now if you look at it, like law firms are our biggest channel partners, right? Like they basically like do a lot of the work for the companies, like on Carta today. Like they're some of our biggest power users. And we've actually helped, where they viewed Carta as competitive in the past of like, hey, is Carta going to take away some of the work that we're doing? It's allowed them to be like more strategic and more efficient with how they kind of like administer the cap table for a lot of their companies. And I think a lot of that same stuff is going to happen with AI, right? Like I think the role of the law firm, the role of the lawyer is going to become a lot more thoughtful, a lot more strategic, and a lot less execution focused. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think it'll be an interesting, not battle, but it'll be an interesting tension between like how quickly can the AI native law firms kind of like come up to market versus how quickly do the existing kind of like bigger law firms adopt those AI tools, and more importantly, like pass on those efficiencies to their customers, right? Because if the customers don't feel the efficiency, then it's kind of just like a nice to have for the law firm, but customers ultimately need to feel it at the end of the day.
Awesome. Let's shift gears. There's been some strategic partnerships as well that
Yeah,
have been announced. So New York Stock Exchange, Morgan Stanley. There's this 401k with Morgan Stanley and Vestwell. So like
yeah,
a lot going on there. But
totally.
maybe if you could kind of give me the through line as to like why you're doing all those things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, it comes back a little bit to the focus point that I mentioned earlier. Like, for example, we used to have a public plan administration tool that competed directly with Morgan Stanley ShareWorks, and we exited that business a couple of years ago. But when we were exiting that business, we thought, hey, we still want to provide a good experience for private companies, like when they ultimately become public. And so, we thought about like, hey, who's the right partner to do it with? And again, an example of like, someone who what used to be competitive to us and now is a great partner for us. Morgan Stanley's been fantastic there. And so for us, it was just like, hey, we don't think this market makes sense for us to kind of like play in, but can we still provide a good experience for customers? And can we do it with a single partner that really provides a unified and really great experience? And we've done that with Morgan Stanley. We're doing that with NYSE. We're doing that with Odyssey on the transfer agent side of the house. And we're starting to do it with Vestwell and Morgan Stanley on the 401k side. So we've been a lot more thoughtful around like, hey, where does it make sense for us not to play from a build or buy perspective? And then let's be really thoughtful and let's be really intentional about picking typically one partner and really going deep with them on these markets that we still think are adjacent to Carta, but for X, Y, or Z reason, we don't want to own internally.
Davis, it was amazing to chat again. And thank you so much for your time.
Likewise. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.